destroy the linings of these arteries, you can have vascular dementia, you can have strokes, and you can have, not even if you don't even have the symptoms of any disease, you have slowing of cognition significantly. So it's important to take care of the brain. And then when you cut off the arteries on a cross section, and if you look at it, there's this tight boundary around the arteries called the blood-brain barrier. Anybody heard of the blood-brain barrier? Yeah. It's a very tight environment that doesn't allow everything that is in our circulation to pass into the brain. Sometimes infections can break down this blood-brain barrier. Sometimes trauma can break it down. Sometimes, and most of the time, bad food can actually break down the blood-brain barrier. You see where this talk is going, right? So, the kind of neurotransmitters and chemicals that are our brain, and I'm not going to go into a whole lot of science here with you guys, but I just wanted to give you a picture of the things that are necessary for us to function properly and vibrantly as a human being. We have hormones like serotonin, which is responsible for, feeling good, being engaged, being aware of our surroundings. We have norepinephrine, which is actually a stress hormone, and I'll talk about stress. It prepares you to cope with things in life. It prepares you, like me, it prepared me to stand right here in front of you and deliver a speech and make sure you're not bored and I'm excited and I'm loud. That's what norepinephrine does. It prepares you to engage with the world. We have dopamine, and dopamine actually is a reward hormone. The kind of foods that we eat, dopamine surge happens when we like something, when we see a loved one, when we see a movie and we get affected, we cry or we laugh. Dopamine does that. Acetylcholine is responsible for transferring messages. All of these are made and broken every day depending on what we eat, how we move, how we sleep, whether we keep ourselves engaged or not. So it's a very, very dynamic organ. And the cellular mechanisms, oh my goodness. A lot of people say, you are set, your genes are set, it doesn't matter what you do, you're going to get what are written in your genes. That's not true. We actually change our genes or the epigenetics of our brain health all the time, every single day. And what we do every day determines whether you activate a gene or deactivate it, and how that manifests as far as brain action is concerned. Now, the brain is an amazing organ, but we have to talk about this incredibly devastating disease, dementia. Because once we are aware of what this is, we can actually start taking good care of our brains. Now, dementia is an umbrella term. Dementia means when people have so much difficulty with their memory and cognition to the point that they can't do things for themselves anymore, like drive, or taking care of their finances, or their activities of daily living, like hygiene and grooming and things of that nature. Alzheimer's disease is the main type of dementia. 60 to 70% of all dementias are Alzheimer's disease. The rest are vascular dementia, frontotemporal lobe dementia, Parkinson's dementia, Lewy body dementia. Robin Williams actually died of, he had Lewy body dementia. It came to service because of him. So there are different types, but the main type is Alzheimer's disease, and I'll be talking about Alzheimer's disease today. Now, Alzheimer's disease is devastating. Currently, there are 5.9 million people suffering from Alzheimer's disease. It's so sad that I actually have to change the statistics on this slide every time I speak. Every month I speak in front of a crowd, I have to change the statistics because the numbers are growing up. Every 64 seconds, somebody's diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And it's the third leading cause of mortality in the United States. It's number one in Japan, and it's number one in UK. And soon it's going to be number one in the United States if we don't do anything about it. Now, this graph actually shows the rate of mortality from other diseases like stroke, breast cancer, HIV, that are all going down. But in the last 15 years, mortality from Alzheimer's disease went up by 145%. 145%. So there are more people dying from Alzheimer's disease than other diseases. It's interesting, we hear so much about cancer. We hear so much about heart disease. We need to hear more and more about Alzheimer's disease as well. 1 in 10 individuals aged 60 years and above are suffering from Alzheimer's disease in the United States. women are affected more than men. While 1 in 11 men are affected in the United States, it's 1 in 6 in women. And the reasons are not very well known. It's one of my research topics that I'm working on. It seems that women are more sensitive to stress, to vascular diseases like high cholesterol, high blood pressure, diabetes, and also hormones have to play a role in it, but we're not very clear. But all we know is that women suffer more from Alzheimer's disease. People think that Alzheimer's disease and dementia start when memory fails. That's not true. We now know that the process and the pathology of the disease actually started 20 or even 30 years before the disease manifested itself. It was the inflammation and oxidation and all the other things that I'm going to talk about that actually brew in us, that pushed the pathology before the disease manifests itself. Right now, the cost of Alzheimer's disease is $290 billion directly, and another $250 billion indirectly, where people have to let go of their jobs to take care of their loved ones, miss their jobs, and things of that nature. Just to put a comparison, all of cancers put together cost $70 billion. All of heart disease costs $100 billion, and this is the cost for Alzheimer's disease. This in itself will collapse our system if we don't do anything about it. By 2050, 16 million people will have Alzheimer's disease, and the cost will be up as much as $3 trillion. Forget about our politics and political proclivities. We all need to get together to talk about attention and prevention towards Alzheimer's disease as much as possible, because it's going to collapse our system in general. Now, there are certain myths, and I think you guys are already aware of some of the myths about Alzheimer's disease. People say Alzheimer's disease cannot be prevented. That's not true. Alzheimer's can be prevented, and that's the purpose of this talk, and I'll tell you what, 90% of Alzheimer's disease can be prevented. The other myth is Alzheimer's disease starts with the symptoms of forgetfulness. No, Alzheimer's disease actually starts way earlier. We all know that after age 20, guys, I don't know if there are any 20-year-olds here, but your cognitive decline starts then. And then slowly and gradually, it gets to the point where you have difficulties in your 60s, 70s, and 80s. So somebody always invariably asks me, how do I know if I have Alzheimer's disease? I say, you do. I know I have Alzheimer's disease. You probably have Alzheimer's disease, and you do, and you do, and you do. And we all have to live in a way where we have the risk, and we should start taking care of ourselves and prevent it. The other myth is there will be one medication treatment for Alzheimer's disease. No. Alzheimer's disease is a very complex disease. It's not one process. It's not only inflammation. It's not only diabetes. It's not only high blood pressure. It's not only traumatic brain injury. It actually comes to the point of manifestations from multiple different directions. So it's not going to be one medication. It probably will be a combination of different medications and lifestyle that will make a huge difference. And then the last myth, which is very common, is it's a purely genetic disease. No, it's not, and I'll show you why. So, for decades, for about 30 years, as a neurologist, I go to this conference called the Alzheimer's Association International Conference. And every year we go, it's the same molecule, tau and amyloid, plaques and tangles. They're lasering it, they're burning it, they're throwing medication at it, they're damaging it with sound waves, whatnot. It almost became boring after a while, because whenever you'd go to these conferences, they'd be talking about the same thing over and over and over again. And 30 years later, and tens of billions of dollars spent, and guess what? 100% failure of all the clinical trials. We don't have a single medication that actually stops or reverses the disease. The medication that are given to people like Namenda and Aricept, those are only symptomatic, and they only work for about 6 months to a year, but the disease process continues. We don't have a treatment for it. And genes. Let's say, I had 2 grandparents. I know I probably have the genes, but does it mean that I will develop Alzheimer's disease? Let me show you what the genetic picture looks like. So this is a genetic picture of Alzheimer's disease. It was done by a GWAS, a genome-wide analysis. It's a specific way of kind of highlighting what are the genes that put us at high risk for Alzheimer's disease. I don't think I have a light, but if you pay attention to the left top corner, those 3 genes, if you have those 3, they're called presenilin 1, presenilin 2, and APP. If you have them, then you're bound to have Alzheimer's disease. And you get to see that in special populations in South America, where you go into a village, the mom has it, the daughter has it, the granddaughter has it, and they all develop it in their 40s and 50s. But guess what's the percentage of the total Alzheimer's disease cases that have those kind of genes? Just guess. 0.5, that's too low. 3% of all Alzheimer's disease is heavily driven by those genes. The rest of the 97% are polygenetic, which means that it's a combination of genes that are responsible for garbage disposal, that are responsible for your immune system, that are responsible for warding off infections and inflammation. So it's not one gene, it's actually multiple genes. Who's heard about ApoE4? ApoE4 is the gene right there. If you have one copy from your mom or your dad, your chances go up by 5%. If you have 2 copies, your chances go up by 15 to 20%. But guess what? Even if you have 2 copies of those genes, 50% of the population never develop the disease. Why? Lifestyle. Lifestyle is the answer. So, you know, there are always these questions that come up and say, well, if you have, say for example, the gene that doesn't get rid of inflammation in your body, what do? Don't create inflammation. If you have a gene that doesn't really function very well as a